On the evening of June 7, 2021, 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh is at his family's hunting estate playing with one of his dogs. The dog is clearly very happy to see him and is jumping and twirling, so Paul decides to record a short video to send one of his friends. He pulls out his phone and is filming for a few seconds. What Paul doesn't realize in that moment is that he just inadvertently recorded something that will prove to be crucial 2 years later in solving his own murder. At around 10 p.m. on that same night, a 911 operator in Hampton County, South Carolina receives a frantic phone call from a man by the name of Alex Murdaugh, who's calling from his hunting estate in nearby Ironton. Alex is a prominent lawyer and his family for several generations has run a very prestigious law firm in the area. Because of this, they're among the most notable people in the Low Country region of South Carolina. As he's explaining to the 911 operator the reason for his call, the man is evidently in a state of shock. He's sobbing and struggling to keep his composure, but what he just saw is a tragedy of such magnitude that anyone would have trouble keeping it together. Just a few minutes prior, Alex was returning home after having spent a couple hours at his elderly mother's house. He'd been driving to the isolated, heavily forested area in which the estate was located until he arrived near the entrance to the property. Then he took a narrow, unpaved access road and soon emerged from the trees into a huge clearing, with in front of him about 1,000 feet away the main house of the estate. He then made his way across the clearing to the house, turned off his car and got out of the vehicle. But when he stepped inside the residence, he knew right away that something was wrong. He could not find his wife Maggie and his son Paul, who should have both been at the house. As a first reaction, he picked up his cell phone and tried giving them a call. No answer. Then he tried calling their names by voice. Still no answer. At this point, beginning to worry, he started making his way to the kennel located across the clearing. The Murdaughs were avid hunters and owned many dogs they used on their frequent hunting trips, and so they built a big kennel on the property with a whole bunch of houses to keep all the animals. When he reached the kennel, Alex finally found his wife and son. They both had been shot dead, and the scene looked like something out of a war movie. There was blood everywhere, and just based on the brutality of the scene, it was clear that it had been an execution of some sort. So Alex of course started panicking and immediately called the police.
911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
When authorities arrive on the scene, they question Alex to see if he can provide any clues leading to discovering who committed the crime. And in fact, he already has a theory. He says, "I know why they've been killed.
My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. I know that's what it is."
He was referring to a boating accident which occurred 2 years prior. On February 24, 2019, Paul Murdaugh and 5 of his closest friends were hanging out at one of his family's residences on a small private island. Although they weren't yet old enough to drink, they'd been able to buy some alcohol using Paul's other brother's ID. And so they were hanging out, drinking, having a good time. At some point during the night they said, "Why don't we leave and continue the night outside?" They had Paul's family's boat, so they jumped in and went to a local bar, where especially Paul and his friend Connor had some more to drink. After a few minutes in the bar, they came out, got back in the boat and started just driving around having fun. By now, they've already drank a lot. Paul more than everyone, but he wants to drive. He raises his voice. "The boat is mine, let me drive." A few seconds later, they crash on the pier of a bridge. When they recovered from the initial shock of the impact, they looked around and soon realized that one person was missing: 19-year-old Mallory Beach. They immediately scrambled to try and locate her in the water, but it was pitch black and they were unable to find her, so they contacted authorities right away. First responders soon arrived on the scene of the crash, but unfortunately, they couldn't find Mallory either. Her body would only be recovered a week later. As soon as the police started investigating the crash and interviewing the kids about what had happened, they all pointed at Paul as the person responsible for the accident. He was driving recklessly with a blood alcohol level that was 3 times the legal limit. But because of his family's connections, everyone was kinda sure that he would have gotten away with it. In fact, several people close to the events told reporters that, from the very beginning, his parents had been extremely busy making arrangements and plotting to keep the eyes of the police as far from Paul as possible. One of the passengers had told police that, when he was in the hospital, Alex Murdaugh had come in his room and said to him, "Look, There's no need to make noise about what happened, you just keep quiet and everything will be fine. 2 months after the boat crash, Paul was charged with causing the death on Mallory Beach, but he pleaded not guilty and remained free after posting a $50,000 bond with no trial date in sight. The whole incident and the aftermath as well had badly tarnished the name of the Murdaughs in the area, to the point that they allegedly started receiving threats, and overall they could clearly sense a general hostility towards them. In June 2021, Paul was still awaiting trial when he was brutally murdered. A few months went by and authorities were still trying to figure out who committed the murder and why, but they didn't seem to be making any progress. Meanwhile, Alex and his other son Buster put together $100,000 to offer as a reward to anyone who was willing to come forward with any information regarding the homicide. But just like the police, they didn't seem to get any closer to solving the case. The situation was still the same when on September 4, Alex Murdaugh made another frantic call to 911. This time, he himself had been the victim of an attempted murder, and so he calls 911, he's panicking, he manages to give his location on a roadside in the middle of nowhere. When the police arrive, he explains that he was outside his car changing a flat tire, when a man in a pickup truck pulled up on his side. The man looked at him for a second, then asked, "Do you need help with the tire?" Alex was about to respond when he saw the man reaching for something in the vehicle. Next thing he knew, the man was shooting at him with a gun before fleeing the scene. And so of course, as soon as the news of the shooting went public, everybody began thinking, oh my god, someone is actually trying to completely wipe out the Murdaugh family. But it didn't last very long, because just a couple days later, Alex's lawyer told media outlets that his client had actually attempted to take his own life by hiring a distant cousin, a man by the name of Curtis Smith, to shoot him. The shooting was supposed to be staged to look like a murder, so that his son Buster could pocket a $10 million payout from his life insurance policy. This because on September 3rd, the day before the shooting, Alex had been kicked out of his family's law firm. They were going through their books and came to realize Alex had been stealing from the clients for years. They were missing millions. Money he had apparently used over the years to fuel an opioid addiction that had been going on for over 2 decades. Meanwhile, Alex released a statement saying, "I've made a lot of decisions that I truly regret," and announced that he would be going in rehab for his drug abuse. However, Curtis Smith, the man Alex allegedly hired to kill him, released a statement saying, "I didn't shoot him. He called me to help him with a flat tire. When I got there, I found Alex holding a gun, ready to shoot himself. I stepped in and managed to take the gun from him, but in the struggle a shot was fired accidentally and it grazed him. Then I left because there was nothing else I could do." Facing multiple charges including insurance fraud, Alex Murdaugh turned himself in on September 16. He immediately posted bond and went back to rehab. While he was there, investigators were searching for new leads and started looking into Alex's past. They discovered that back in 2018, his housekeeper Gloria Satterfield had died in very suspicious circumstances. Apparently, she was standing on the front steps of the house when the dogs somehow pushed her and she fell down a very short flight of stairs, dying as a result of the fall. Her death was ruled natural and no autopsy was ever performed. At the funeral, Alex did something very strange. He suggested her 2 sons to file a wrongful death lawsuit against him, and even recommended a lawyer, friend of him, to represent the 2 boys. As a result of this lawsuit, Alex's insurance paid $4.3 million. Only none of the money ever went to Gloria's family. Instead, it all went in Alex's pocket. When the story came out in 2021, Murdaugh was charged with 2 felonies for the insurance fraud, adding to the ones he was already facing for the fake murder attempt and for having stolen money from his firm's clients, for a grand total of 84 criminal charges, mostly related to fraud and theft. And as if all this wasn't enough, in July 2022, he was also indicted for the murder of his son Paul and his wife Maggie. The trial began on January 25, 2023. As it turned out, authorities had been considering him as a possible suspect for a number of months, because some of the elements of the case simply didn't make any sense. For example, although he claimed to have checked the victims' pulses and rolled the bodies over to see if they were still breathing, when police arrived on the scene on the night of the murder, his hands and clothes were completely clean. Also, the fact that he'd been so quick to offer an explanation for why someone might have done it made him look even more suspicious. In addition, the GPS on his phone showed a huge spike in the number of footsteps taken right around 9 PM, which would corroborate the theory that he was running around doing what he needed to do to cover his tracks. In face of all this, Alex maintained his innocence, supported by the fact that, based on the type of wounds found on the victims, authorities had determined that Maggie and Paul had been shot using two different weapons, and some of the experts who analyzed the scene stated that there likely had been two shooters, and overall there was no evidence physically placing him on the scene of the crime. However, it all would change when the prosecution revealed the single most crucial piece of evidence in the whole case. At 8:44 PM on June 7, 2021, Paul Murdaugh was about 5 minutes away from being brutally executed together with his mom, according to the timing reconstructed by authorities. He decided to take a quick video of his dog. He probably didn't even notice because for him there was nothing strange about it. But in the video, aside from his own and Maggie's, Paul also recorded Alex's voice in the background,
Come here, Cash. Come here, Bob. Cash.
thus placing his father on the scene of the homicide roughly 5 minutes before it happened, and exposing the lies he told investigators when he claimed that he already was at his mother's house around the time when the murders occurred.
Were you in fact at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
In fact, his car and cell phone data showed that he arrived at his mother's house well after 9 PM, and in the time span between when he arrived at his mother's house and 10:06 PM when he called 911, he made several phone calls to friends and family, including 5 to his wife, which prosecutors allege were made to corroborate his claims that he wasn't there when the murders took place. According to prosecutors, he had first shot Paul multiple times with a shotgun. When Maggie came running, Alex then turned on her with the second weapon he was wielding, which was an AR-15 style rifle, and shot her multiple times as well. He then supposedly got undressed, washed himself from the blood with a gardening hose, jumped on a golf cart, and drove to the house on the other side of the property, where he got fresh clothes and disposed of the blood-soaked ones and of the two guns. According to investigators, the motive for the crime was simply to create a diversion in order to lighten the pressure he was under from multiple sides. In fact, at the time of the murders, he was already facing charges for the insurance fraud following Gloria Satterfield's death, and was being sued for $10 million by the family of Mallory Beach in the aftermath of the boat crash. And he also knew very well that his law firm would soon find out about the money he'd been stealing over the years. And so, in an effort to garner sympathy from the community and dissuade people from further inquiring about his financial crimes, he decided to murder his wife and son and make it look like some sort of vigilante had taken revenge over his family.
I recognize that the case against Alec, if he were a victim of some vigilante, would in fact be over.
On the 2nd of March 2023, Alex Murdaugh was convicted for killing Paul and Maggie and sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences. Thank you for watching.